So what do I do after a vacation celebrating 15 years with my wonderful wife? Watch Craigslist free for fallen trees so I can harvest the material for turning, especially when for our anniversary we took a bowl turning class with Lyle Jamieson. I check for the pith on both sides so I can cut along that, and then I want to make sure the two blanks I get from this log have the pith running along their centers. There's quite a bit of debate on the right way to cut a log. I prefer going against the long grain since long shavings clog up the saw, and I rock the bar toe to heel as I work through the log section. The bark is removed since this isn't going to be a live edge bowl, and I personally like the skin on the backs of my hands. Since this wood is from the growing season, it's pretty easy to separate it by peeling it off with a hatchet. While I can't speak for Lyle, I will try to call out some specific things we learned while at his class. Overall, it was a great class and well worth it, and will make us much better turners. His DVDs are great, but it doesn't compare to being with him and being able to ask questions and have him critique you while you're working. Lyle starts his bowls between centers as I'm doing here. The two big advantages over other techniques is the ability to find the balance before starting and allowing adjustment of the piece later for better feature placement. Here you can see I found the balance point. This will allow me to kick the speed up early so there is less out-of-round turning. With the balance point found, I can crank down on the tailstock to secure the piece in the teeth of the spur center. Locking the spindle in place, I jam the piece back and forth, tighten if loose, and repeat. The spindle moves a little, but the teeth and the wood stay in place. Like anything on the lathe, start slow, but you can see by the time any vibration shows up, we're doing 900 RPM. You can see there's no chunk at all, just smoothly following the bevel along the edge. As you can see, starting the blank between centers proves itself to be a very quick way to start getting the blank round. However, it isn't perfect. You can see the lathe starting to shake in this next clip. This is due to the shape of the piece of wood. It is fatter at one end, which makes sense since this was a branch, and that was obvious since the pith was off-center in the log. Bad for a board, not such a big deal for turning. This wasn't covered by Lyle, but logically, to me, it makes sense to reduce the imbalance by removing material from the face. And, since I don't want to adjust the blank just yet, I'll just remove the material from the sapwood face. This is done with a series of push cuts into the face, slightly skewing the line of travel away from the axis of turning. Material-wise, it is looking like a much better balanced blank. Once it's fully round, I can take advantage of the second feature of turning between centers. I can see the sapwood of the walnut isn't even between the sides, so I can adjust the center, incorrectly in the video, but I fix that later after I turned off the camera. So I'm slightly unbalanced, but I can quickly round out the blank again with the push cut along the edge. For anything which can go between centers on the lathe, I'm completely sold on this method. You can see the results here with the two curves of the sapwood lining up pretty darn close. Lyle then had us remove the rear face of the blank. I used the same technique mentioned earlier with the push cuts into the face. Start one, go until flat, start the next, go just shy of the previous, rinse and repeat. As I approach the tailstock support, I'm careful not to hit the tailstock and leave about an inch stub. Now, to remove the ridges between each push cut, I roll the tool so the flute is completely closed. The lower wing is used to scrape the surface flat by going back forth. In the end, I actually want a slightly concave surface toward the center of the bowl. A small divot was done to give me a mark to help center the next step. The blank is then removed from between centers and laid flat on the bed with a support behind it. With a chisel, I remove the nub and make sure all of the remaining wood is below the concave plane. Lyle had us use a faceplate and a glue block method for chucking the bowl. A straightened coat hanger is slid through the hole in the glue block for centering purposes. First, the outline of the glue block is scribed onto the blank. Then, thick or gel CA glue is applied inside the pencil line. Then an activator is sprayed onto the glue block. And finally, the coat hanger is used to center the block and slide it down onto the blank. After a minute or so, the faceplate is threaded onto the spindle. Now I do push cuts into the top of the bowl for two purposes. Make it flat And I see a knot where the pith will crack since it's wet wood, so I need to remove it. When I say flat, I don't really mean it. I really only needed the rim of the bowl, but since I had that knot, I might as well remove the bulk of the material. But it can be as rough or stepped as it comes off the tool, since most of this surface will be removed when hollowing the bowl. I took a quick truing pass along the outside of the bowl before moving to the outside. Lyle had us work the outside shape first. This is done with a series of push cuts from the bottom up the side of the bowl. Each one is followed by a slightly shallower push cut. This gives a ziggurat shape with all of the steps. Then, when you step away, you can see that matches the curve of the bowl that you're looking to make. One thing to look out for is that you leave enough waste wood at the bottom of the bowl. It seems to be a consistent issue that new turners never leave enough wood for the foot. Once the shape takes form, you can cut each step in half if you want. Lyle then had us use the pull cut to finish trimming those ridges and do more refining on the outside of the bowl. The pull cut is best explained as a bevel-supported cut, the low tool angle, and cutting at the tip. This cut produces very fine shavings compared to the push cut. The tool rest needs to be consistently adjusted to allow for the correct orientation of the tool to the wood. Once the shape was refined, Lyle had us switch to the shear scrape. This has the tool rolled over into a scraping position, but at a 45-degree or steeper angle, where the wing of the tool intersects the wood. Then we focus on removing the high points and gently cleaning up the surface. It produces fine gossamer shavings and leaves the surface ready to be sanded at a fairly high grit paper, like 320. Lyle then had us work on the rim of the bowl, making a choice between an inward or outward facing rim. And while I'm doing it wrong and using a scrape here, the proper technique would be a shear scrape. Since this is inward facing, I'm easing the outer edge with sandpaper to avoid cuts later. Lyle's method for hollowing the bowl is to start at the center of the bowl, always traveling downhills toward the center. The goal is to match the outer shape, starting with the first cut all the way until you get about an inch from the outer wall. Starting at about an inch from the outer wall of the bowl, we change tactics. We start a cut down the side of the bowl, but rather stop after about an inch to inch and a half. Each subsequent push cut takes just a hair less. We also break out the calipers and regularly check for a uniform wall thickness over that section. The idea is that by the time we make the last cut for this section, we have a uniform thickness. And regardless of how recently we've sharpened our tool, we head off to the grinder before making this final pass. On the outer rim, we find the bevel angle by riding the bevel against the existing wall. Back out and plunge our push cut, establishing our new bevel, and watch the thickness throughout the cut for consistency. Pardon the focus issues here, and if you decide to make YouTube videos, avoid cameras which don't let you turn off autofocus. If all went well, you have a nice consistent wall thickness over the first portion of your bowl. With the first section done, we repeat the process an inch to an inch and a half sections down the side of the bowl. We step down the side of the bowl and regularly measure for consistency. We prepare for the last cut of that section by sharpening the tool again. We find the bevel angle by backing up a short distance from where we're going to start the cut. Place the heel of the tool on the wood and bring the tool forward until we get a slight shaving and start moving forward again with our push cut. And we follow through until the end. If all went well, we now have a couple inches of consistent wall thickness. Once we are to where the foot is connected to the glue block, we can't check the wall thickness. Here we remove the center by feel. As the bulk of the material is removed, every couple of cuts we compare the shape of the wall, looking for a consistent curve. As we get close, we'll be able to feel for that evenness of thickness and curve. Go sharpen the tool and get ready for the final pass. Find the bevel as before by riding the heel gently on the bowl and bringing the tool forward until you see shavings. Then move forward toward the center, remembering to adjust speed to slower as you approach the slower center. And with practice you'll get a consistent wall thickness and reasonably smooth wall. The inside of the bowl will not be nearly as smooth as the outside since the push cut produces a less clean of a cut. Sanding will likely start at a lower grit paper, but go up through the grits. Using a chisel and hammer, give the bowl and glue block a couple decent taps to separate them. Next, Lyle had us measure the depth of the bowl. Then, on the outside of the foot, mark the bottom of the bowl, the wall thickness, and finally, where the real foot will be. Next, I'm going to deviate from Lyle. He brings up the tailstock to support the bowl, with the inside riding on the glue block covered with leather. It is certainly a better supported way, but it means that the bottom has to have a little nub that's going to be chiseled off and sanded. I opted to use a vacuum chuck since the cuts here are pretty gentle. I start with push cuts to clear the CA glue and bring the foot to the last line marked in the previous step. Once that's done, I use push cuts to narrow the foot by pushing it in just slightly, trying to follow the existing curve of the bowl. Next, I use some scraping to define the foot of the bowl, so inside is hollowed just a little bit. Scraping doesn't leave a good finish, but sandpaper will take care of that. I think a push cut might be the way to go in the future. The first part of the sanding is to blend the newly exposed wood with the existing curve. For that, I'll use a lower grit. The rest is sanded with higher grits. I noticed that there was a knot which was going to cause issues earlier on, but I decided to work the whole bowl anyway. But I'm just going to use some paste wax to finish this since I know that knot will rip open as this beast dries. To summarize, the opportunity to take a class with Lyle Jamieson was an incredible experience. My retelling of some of the things we learned will not give the class justice. I can see the things we learned in this class will propel us forward in turning, which, watching other videos, even his own DVDs, cannot compare. If you have an opportunity to take some classes in the future, I really encourage that you seize it. Thank you for watching, and God bless.